I did an episode recently where I described withdrawal cycles. Now, this type of cycle is created when both partners have an avoidant attachment style or avoidant coping style in times of ruptures and disconnection in the relationship. In this episode, I want to focus on pursue cycles. In other words, this type of cycle is created where both partners have an anxious style of attachment during times of rupture or disconnection in the relationship. So what happens if you're in a relationship where your protective move is to pursue and your partner's is the same? How do you begin to de-escalate these cycles so that both partners feel safe enough to express how they feel during ruptures and disconnections? How do we de-escalate cycles so that both partners begin to feel heard and understood and reconnected after ruptures in the relationship? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Pursue cycles, or the high-maintenance relationship, embracing the drama together. Let's get started.
Welcome to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast that provides support and guidance to help heal the wounds of attachment trauma. Whether you find yourself struggling with unresolved issues in the past or have experienced trauma in your current relationship, our goal is to provide accurate, scientifically informed information, as well as the tools to help you create a secure connection between you and your partner. And here's your host, Tom Phil.
Okay, so what we're talking about is when both partners have an anxious attachment style. And of course, we've talked many times before about the typical rupture repair cycle that occurs in all relationships, where there's a sense of connection, then there's a misattunement, there's a disconnection or a rupture that takes place, which then forces the couple and each partner to find their way back to repair and a place of connection again. So within that, what happens when both partners have the same type of attachment style? What kind of cycles does this create that might be different than what we would call a pursue avoidant cycle, meaning one person is anxious, the other avoidant, or as I laid out in a previous podcast, where both partners have a withdraw or avoidant attachment style. So we want to focus in today on what happens when both partners have a anxious style of attachment. So just to recap, what does an anxious style of attachment involve? What might that look like from an outside perspective? Well, often they feel anxious when there's too much distance or disconnection from their partner. They tend to push for reconnection, sometimes in an overly aggressive way. They may come off as demanding or controlling to their partner. They often will criticize or blame in order to get their partner to comfort or soothe them. They struggle to recognize internally their triggers and their own insecurities. They often tend to perceive their partner as abandoning or rejecting them, and because of the template they use to view themselves, their partner, and the relationship, they often tend to read into those triggers and as if their partner is motivated to send those signals to them that they are being rejected or they are going to be abandoned. So their sense of insecurity lies just below the surface and can be easily triggered with anxious attachment individuals. And they can read into situations that will trigger them as well. So all this is characterized by high anxiety and low avoidance, meaning that the anxious attachment individual reduces their anxiety by moving towards the cause of the anxiety. So part of the problem with the pursue cycles is that the couple can get caught in the invalidating mode of dominant defining. So this is something I've talked about before, where if our sense of validation is what holds us together, when our partner is able to understand our internal experience, and that creates a sense of cohesive and a coherent sense of self in us and holds us together, so to speak, then what happens if our partner is invalidating us? And one of those invalidating modes is what's called dominant defining, which means that often couples can argue over whose version of reality is going to win. Dominant defining is just the pursuit of having your experience be the accepted experience in the relationship. Oftentimes with anxious individuals, there can be little room for difference, little room for other people's experience of the same event. They have to have their experience very well validated in order for their anxiety to recede into the background and for them then be able to empathize and understand and validate others as well. So anxious attachment cycles can get caught very much in this mode of dominant defining, where both partners are trying to define what reality looks like from each of their perspectives. Now, pursue cycles can often explode quickly. There can be raised voices, angry accusations, angry defenses, and then they can quickly dissipate until the next cycle takes hold, and they repeat the same pattern. So often it's a little bit like an exploding volcano, and then it can go dormant for days, weeks, maybe sometimes even months. But when one or both partners has been triggered, their style of trying to reconnect and repair tends to clash, and it can cause a lot of explosions, a lot of high energy, raised voices, sometimes depending on the individual and the amount of trauma in the past, depending on the family in which they grew up and what was normalized and what wasn't. They can bash each other's character. They can curse at one another. So it can certainly take on more acidic type behaviors and manifestations in the relationship. But some couples don't go that far. They keep a check on that, but it can still have this big clash of personalities, so to speak. So the pursue cycle we're talking about here is one in which both partners tend to come together. There might be a lot of energy in the way they clash and are trying to get their needs met that can then dissipate and calm down and, like a volcano, sort of go dormant for a while until this pattern tends to repeat itself. The other thing that tends to characterize oftentimes these types of cycles is that both partners struggle to come back and make repairs. They struggle to come back and re-enter the same conversation without the same emotion, without the same energy, and learning how to de-escalate those so they can actually talk through it. These couples often try to achieve the same thing, which is they both are trying to get validation for who they are and to have a secure connection. But the problem is that they go about trying to get their needs met in a highly emotional and aggressive way that is usually mimicked by their partner. And as a result of all of this is two people who desperately want to be in a secure relationship, but tend to create drama in the pursuit of that connection. As I said, these explosive or high conflict couples may even thrive on the drama because it's something that they've actually gotten used to. Their personal histories may dictate that if you don't aggressively pursue your partner, they will not be heard, they will not be understood, nor will you, and most importantly, they will be left feeling abandoned or rejected by the person that matters the most. And so their personal histories can often play a role in why they are so aggressively pursuing that sense of connection. It's a little bit like turning up the heat. If you have a pilot light on your furnace at home, it's a little like lighting that pilot light And when it first gets lit, it's a very strong blue flame. And then you have to sort of dial it back a little bit so it becomes a little more of the yellows and a little more of the reds, and it's not burning so hot. That's a little bit the way I sort of picture these couples. Sometimes they clash, and it's a fiery explosion where that blue flame just surrounds the whole room. And then they have to learn how to dial this back into a manageable heat where they both can understand better what just happened. So how do they break out of the drama cycle, the fiery clashes that so often keep them stuck? Well, let's talk about some solutions here. One of the first things that these types of couples have to learn to do is before they act, they have to be able to stop and pause and get out of their automatic mode of responding. That's in part what cycles are. Cycles are just habits. They're automatic modes of responding to your partner's tone more often than anything else. And so we have to be able to interrupt that automatic pattern from happening. There's a metaphor that I use with my couples where I talk about when we've been on the airplane and we're getting ready to take off, the flight attendants will often tell us that in the case of an emergency, a oxygen mask will fall from right in front of the seat where you are. And the very next thing they say is, put the oxygen mask on yourself first, then help your child or partner or somebody else. I think this is a really good metaphor because what happens is we have to have a big dose of oxygen to calm down. When we get triggered by our partner, oftentimes that automatic response, that emotional trigger, wants us to fire back. And so we need to learn how to self-regulate. We need to learn how to put on our oxygen mask, and we need to learn how to interrupt that automatic response that so often then perpetuates those cycles. So the first thing I would say is put on your oxygen mask. Start noticing what your triggers are. Become aware of how they feel in your body, the sudden sensations that can take over, and start giving yourself the benefit of a slow, deep breath before you respond. Often what that does is that increases the response of your vagus nerve, which is more of a safety nerve, as opposed to the fight or flight nerves in your brain. And so you want to be able to slow that process down, almost as if you're watching a slow motion replay in a football game or baseball game, something like that, so that you're able to interrupt that automatic response and able to respond and react so that you're better able to respond instead of react. And that's what we want. A reaction is automatic, but a response is thought through. So we want to be able to differentiate between those two. I think another thing that's really important in terms of breaking some of these cycles is to speak from a sense of self. You want to focus much less on what your partner is or is not doing or what is missing for you, and a lot more from a sense of self, of your own wants and needs. I feel really hurt right now. I need you to just sit and listen to me for a minute so that I can get some of this out and I can formulate kind of what I want to say, and then I'd love to hear your opinion as well. So you're speaking from a sense of self. I think, I want, I need, I feel. We need to be practicing self-soothing. Again, that's something that I think is ongoing. I've talked a lot about on my podcast, meditation, mindfulness practices. Those are really important for being able to learn how our body responds to stress and being able to interrupt that automatic process where we perceive and then it floods our body or our brain, we're overwhelmed, and then we automatically have a word or a behavior, and it happens so fast. We want to slow that whole process down by being able to recognize, oh, I feel tense in my body, I feel a heaviness in my shoulders, I feel a tightness in my chest, I feel like my stomach just did a complete flip upside down. We need to be able to recognize those in our body and be able to slow that cascade of events down so that we can then learn to respond and not just react. Another thing is know your triggers. Know what your triggers are. Know when your partner uses a certain tone. Know exactly what that is like for you. When you use this tone, I go to a place where I feel like I'm being talked down to. If you know that about yourself, then next time your partner uses that tone, see how long you can hold that feeling without acting on it. Can you make any kind of space? Is there any room for you to be able to just sit with that for a second or two longer than usual instead of immediately responding? So knowing your triggers is really important as well. You need to be the first to call a timeout or to take a break. There is no shame in saying, okay, wait a minute, I don't think we're getting anywhere. Let's take a timeout. Let's take a break for a minute, and then let's come back in 15, 20 minutes and try this again. I need some time to calm down here. And then last, come together against the cycle. If you and your partner are on the same page about learning how to really de-escalate and learning how to repair, then both of you need to recognize that, yes, we get caught in cycles and it comes to dominate our relationship. And this is especially true for pursue type cycles. This is especially true for anxious, where both partners are anxiously attached, because these sort of high maintenance relationships, these dramas that can clash like volcanoes and then subside, they can really come to dominate the relationship. So come together against the cycle. Both of you understand that at any point, either of you can call out, wait a minute, I think we're in a cycle here. Let's stop. Let's slow this down. So there's some ideas for how to break out of these pursue cycles that can be so devastating to the anxiously attached individuals. So I hope you found this helpful today. As always, give me some feedback. Let me know what you like, what you don't like. I'd love to hear from you. And until then, we'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to Trauma-Free Relationship, a podcast for the healing of attachment trauma. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, or our website at traumafreerelationship.com. Be sure to look for our next episode on your favorite streaming service.